Hello, everyone. We have some more folks coming in, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. I just wanted to say, if everyone could please double check their Zoom names, and if your Zoom name does not reflect who you are, please feel free to change it by clicking on the triple dots right next to your little window and renaming yourselves. That'll be great. Thank you so much. We have a couple more trickling in. In the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourself, what organization you come from in the chat. We like to promote the chat as a very robust way for folks to get to know each other and to network. And so throughout the course of this event, please feel free to insert any of your questions or just talk with each other in the chat. And since we are at 11:03, oh yeah, sure. I got a question on how to change your name on the on Zoom. And so if you hover either over the participant list or your own personal square on the Zoom window where everyone's webcams are, you can either right click or hover and press the ellipsis to find the rename option. Thank you for asking. And if there are any other technical difficulties, please feel free to ask. In the meantime, I'm just going to go over some quick housekeeping. So for those of you who saw the record notification go up, this meeting will be recorded and part of the post-meeting material shared at the end of the presentation. Additionally, we ask that all folks please put their questions in the chat so that we can monitor them and make sure that we get to everyone as efficiently as possible. There's going to be ample time for us to talk with you and just really get to know what everyone's needs are. So please don't hesitate to let anyone know if there is anything that you might need. And with that, I am going to throw it to Renee for some introductions.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I believe you've probably received a notification that we are recording this. So feel free to take notes, but we'll also be sending the materials out afterwards, which will include the full PowerPoint presentation as well as a link to the recording. I am the Workforce Development Director with Valley Vision. We are a civic leadership organization that serves the greater Sacramento region, which actually includes up to a 9-county region. And we have 6 primary impact areas of focus, the largest of which is our 21st century workforce. So we function as a workforce intermediary, linking together and aligning and convening system partners to help create and enhance the workforce system for our region. We're pleased to bring this webinar to you today along with our partner, Madeline Barber with the Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce MetroBusiness Center. So I'm going to hand it over to Maddie now to say a warm welcome as well.
Thank you so much, Renee. It is great to be here with everybody today. As Renee mentioned, my name is Maddie Barber. I'm a program manager with the Metro Business Center, which is a department of the Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce. We provide technical assistance and support to our small and mid-sized businesses throughout the region and get the pleasure of hosting and co-hosting these amazing business education opportunities. So just want to say a very big thank you to all of our panelists today, as well as to the Valley Vision team and to all of you for joining us for this really important discussion. And Renee, I will pass it back over to you for some panel introductions.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Appreciate it. First of all, I want to introduce to you Mike Sneed, who is president of Sierra Consulting Services and serves on the Golden Sierra Job Training Agency Workforce Development Board. For the past 10 years, his firm has been assisting California companies with applying for state training funds, ranging from $10,000 to $500,000. These funds help reimburse companies for training their employees on business skills, manufacturing and commercial skills, computer skills, and process improvement. Additionally, Mike works with several nonprofit organizations that help displaced workers and aged out foster youth find meaningfully job-related skills, job placements, and life skills. Prior to starting his own business, Mike worked in corporate finance and tax credits. In addition to Mike, we have 2 other panelists. Mike is going to be doing an introduction to ETP for us in just a second, but I'm going ahead and read the introductions for our other panelists, Mike, and then I'll hand it over to you to give us kind of a baseline understanding of this complicated benefit that we want to take advantage of. So in addition to Mike, we have Annie Rafferty from Butte College. She is the Workforce Training and Development Director. Annie's responsible for providing quality performance consulting, workforce training programs, and funding annually for 11,500 California employees and over 120 employers. She has 28 years of experience in corporate, local government, and academic environments as a Senior Vice President, Global Training and Development Executive, North State Society Human Resources Board member as well. She is the executive leader of Upskill California and certified trainer for the California Community Colleges. Since joining Butte College in 2008, she has facilitated over 1.5 million in ETP funding annually to employees with the California Community Colleges and Workforce Development Partners. In addition to Annie, we have William Walker, who is a Workforce Development Manager for Cetta Sacramento Works. He works to provide a connection between employers and job seekers. He is responsible for the employer services team, which includes rapid response coordination and special grants that serve the most vulnerable in the Sacramento community. William managed Cetta's first employment training panel contracts in partnership with Asher College, formerly called Tech Skills. This ETP program grew from $237,000 to approximately $1.3 million to cover training for incumbent workers in the healthcare and information technology industries. Along with a team of fellow workforce development managers, William provides training, education, social services, and job placement services to a pool of over 45,000 youth, adults, and dislocated workers each year. So we're so thankful to this esteemed panel for being with us to provide us information about the range of services available for employment training panel benefits. This might be your first time hearing about these benefits, or perhaps you have tried to dive into it, but there's so much information behind the curtain, it's hard to figure out where to get started. We're hoping that this webinar will demystify some of that for you and gives you some potential starting points. So we're very thankful for Mike for helping us to plan this webinar. And at this point, we're going to hand it over to him to provide some baseline understanding about employment training panel benefits. So Mike, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so we'll just go through a few basic things on ETP. It's been around for 40 years, which is pretty amazing. The purpose of ETP is to help increase the employee skills of California-based companies. And so originally it was created to address impacts in the aerospace and defense sectors. And we all know California can be a relatively expensive or challenging environment to work in. Where it really shines for ETP is to help companies that are facing out-of-state competitors to improve the skill sets of their employees so that hopefully by working smarter instead of harder, we can improve efficiencies and bend the cost curve back down and be competitive with the companies that are out of state. And so what it is mainly designed to do is that it will reimburse the training of California companies for their California employees. Currently, the reimbursement rate is $23 per hour per employee. Companies are able to use both internal or external trainers. And currently the individual company cap is that you can apply up to $500,000, although first time companies usually are limited to about $250,000. And the dollar amount ends up based upon how many employees you have and how many hours you work. And then there's a formula that kind of determines how much you can apply for and be approved. Next slide. So a lot of people wonder, okay, what kinds of training can ETP reimburse for? And they break it up into different types or categories. And the good news is that pretty much will cover, good 90–95% of the training most companies that do. So that includes business skills. And that's generally most skills that businesses do regardless of industry. Commercial skills, so that's usually the type of skills that are designed for specific industries. Manufacturing skills, computer skills, management skills, process improvement, hazmat, and OSHA 10, OSHA 30. One of the things that kind of a carve out in terms of the training that it does not reimburse for, there's just a few, and that is employee orientation. So usually the first hour when you hire someone new, it's usually, there's your desk, please fill out the paperwork, things like that. So that first hour is not included. But beyond that, when you're onboarding new employees and you're training them how to do things at your company, then that onboarding does count. The other thing that does not count is mandated training, so any sexual harassment, HR related training, legal training, or continuing education. And then basic safety such as first aid, fire extinguisher, things like that. Apart from that, almost all the other safety job related is reimbursable. All right. The current industries that are eligible for reimbursement and for accessing the funds is what we call priority industries right now. And this is for ETP's core funding. A little later, Annie will talk about some of the funding available, the alternative funding for nonprofits, government entities. But right now I'm talking about corporate or companies and what they can access for the traditional core funding. And so the industries right now is pretty much those that produce a product. So that'd be agriculture, healthcare, biotech, construction, green and clean technology, logistics, IT, manufacturing, food production, multimedia and entertainment, and technical services. The industries that are not allowed for ETP are a few things, but gambling, restaurants and retail, and also service-based companies. So in times past, service-based companies, which we would call non-priority industries, are allowed. Right now, there has been a high demand for ETP funds, and therefore ETP has limited to the industries that I've listed above, and which we would call priority industries. We will see if the non-priority industries can be allowed at a later time, but right now they're not. Okay, next. Who is eligible? And again, this is for companies only. Annie will address some of the nonprofit or organizations that can access the funds through alternative funding. Right now, I'm talking about the core funding or traditional funding for ETP. And again, it's designed for companies that have out-of-state competition. And what does that look like? So right now, any size company can apply, but you have to have at least one full-time employee in addition to the owner. So that would exclude sole proprietors, consultants, things like that. They actually are for companies and not for sole proprietors. Number two, questions been asked, when can a company apply? And typically you have to have been paid the employment training tax for a year, which means no startups right now. And then you can have repeat contractors. So if you've had an ETP contract in the past, you can apply for second and third and subsequent ETP contracts. Excuse me. As I mentioned, out-of-state competition plays a big role with ETP. The reason for that is, as a scenario, if I'm in Texas and I'm producing a coffee maker, and you're here in California and you produce a coffee maker, but I can produce a coffee maker $10 cheaper for the same quality, how do you compete? And so that's the scenario that ETP is hoping to help California-based companies compete with their out-of-state competitors by increasing the skill sets of the employees. How do we measure that? One of two ways. Either the outside California revenue is 25% or more. So if you're a for-profit company with revenue of 25% or more that's derived from out of California, then you can qualify. Or most companies, most of their revenue is primarily based here in California. And so for those companies, then we would look to see, do you have 3 out-of-state competitors that come into California and compete with you here? And most companies usually know their competitors, and usually can find if there's companies that locally from Reno, from Oregon, sometimes companies as far away as the East Coast do come into California and compete with California companies, and we can identify that. The other thing is that the turnover rate needs to be less than 20%. And then employees need to meet an ETP minimum wage. It varies by county. Currently, it's $21.57 or up to $23.53. Usually more in the Bay Areas have the higher rates. Companies can use both wage and benefits to achieve that ETP minimum wage. And what that means is the company will qualify based upon out-of-state competition, low turnover, but then we have to qualify how many employees will get reimbursed within that company. And the requirement for employees to qualify for reimbursement is meeting this ETP minimum wage and working full-time. So usually out of a company, maybe 90%, 80% of the employees will meet this criteria. And then once you're approved, how do we document the training? ETP has a one-page roster. And so as you do your training, the trainer would hand out the roster, fill out the topic, the date, the start time, end time, things like that. Each employee would sign the roster. That's how we verify that training occurred. And then this information is uploaded into the ETP database and tracked from there. On the left, so we talked about the sign-in sheet rosters. The training delivery can be either in person. We talk about classroom, but classroom is a loose term with ETP. It can be in a conference room, but it can be out on a job site. It can be by your desk. It's anywhere where the trainer is speaking to a trainee in person. We do also have on-the-job training. The training can be remote, so via webinar or video conference. And then there's also computer-based training where there's pre-canned video modules for companies that obtain that service from vendors. The CBT can be allowed as well. That is at a lower rate. Currently, that's at $9 an hour for CBT. The rest of the training is $23 an hour. Training can be formal or informal. Most of the training tends to be, I've seen with clients, informal training where it's impromptu. It's out on a job site. Supervisor is walking the floor, sees something and addresses it, tries to improve something. So informal training can be allowed. Formal training is next Tuesday at 10 a.m. We're going to have a sales meeting. These 5 people are invited. And ETP is fine, whether it's formal and informal. The key on training is, did the employees learn a new skill? If the employees learned a new skill, regardless of how it was conducted, then usually it will qualify. And then ETP, in terms of how the benefit is received, ETP will issue checks as the employees hit certain training milestones. So it is not a grant. It is a performance-based contract based on how many hours of training you do within a 2-year contract. And depending on the number of hours that you train, times $23 an hour is usually what the progress payment will be. So again, it's not a grant. You do need to perform in terms of training the hours that you say you will. And it's not a tax credit, where it's not designed to reduce your taxes. You will receive checks in the mail based upon the performance of the contract. And then last was just some examples of when and how do companies use ETP. A lot of times if companies are expanding and going through a high growth period, they need to add middle management, or they're promoting their technicians into a supervisor manager role. So if they're adding the people skills to their technical folks, a lot of times ETP will help adding those skills and reimbursing the training. Customer service or international expansion. If companies are looking to expand beyond our borders, then there's all hosts of kinds of things that change and training that occurs, such as logistics, or recipes need to be changed, or marketing efforts, or legal in terms of the tariffs and things like that involved. ERP or computer implementations, or hiring a lot of new employees, such as an example, several companies. One was hiring 200 welders, a lot of training involved. Another had 50 construction new employees, again, a lot of training involved. Construction companies, we've seen where a lot of these skill sets are that they're hiring people for, they're very green. They don't have the level of skills that they used to have. And therefore, companies are having to train folks from the ground up, requiring a lot more training and a lot more skills because the basics just aren't there. And or if companies are automating, such as new machines, new high-speed manufacturing process, or even in construction, there's a lot of new satellite, GPS, drones being used. So it's really interesting to see all the different technology that is going into a host of industries. And when new technology is introduced to a company, a lot of training is involved to assimilate that technology into the processes of the company. So that is, again, some of the core information for ETP for the traditional for-profit company training. And then I know Annie wanted to talk about and address some of the alternate funding for some of the nonprofit or government funding.
All right, well, thanks, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
And so just a couple of brief points here about the alternative funds. So the good news is, you know, our state has listened to our voice of the impacts from the pandemic. And so as a result of the pandemic, over the last year, ETP established alternative funds and modified the eligibility of those funds to be able to provide employers who traditionally do not pay into the tax to be able to participate in accessing these funds. And so there are a number of what's called a multiple employer contract holders. And we here at Butte College, underneath our Upskill California relationship with the colleges, we have access to those funds in a current contract. So Los Rios district is one of our subcontractors, and any of you who are a government agency or an educator, or if you're a service provider, such as the one-stops that I see some of you provide those business services, you may be working with some of those employers that don't necessarily fit into the priority status that Michael shared with you, which is the core program of ETP. So that being said, we can work with you to learn more about the companies and how those companies can access the funds. And it is going to be really a case-by-case basis because they still need to have a full-time employee who's earning a wage and meets the 8 hours minimum in order to participate in the program. And so for the nonprofit and the government agencies, many of those positions have higher wages with particular positions that you may be interested in upskilling or providing some level of technical training to help advance that employee. So those are some of the categories there. The other category would be the turnover requirement of 20%. Knowing the impact of the pandemic, we just need to be able to provide a justification. And if you have a over 20% as a turnover rate, we just then work with you to be able to share your situation with the employment training panel as it relates to your application. So those are some of the primary categories, and we would work with you direct to learn more about your career pathing and your upskilling that you'd want to provide to a certain population of employees. And that first point of contact there locally within the Sacramento region for that type of funding will be with Melissa this year.
Thank you so much for that information, Annie. And it just kind of highlights the need to work with someone on this project. If someone chooses to take advantage of ETP benefits, there's so many different categories and stipulations related to it. So we are going to have a few questions to the panel members, and then we also want to encourage questions from the audience. So I'll ask the first few questions, and then if you have questions, if you could put those in the chat, we'll be facilitating those in just a few minutes. And the first question that we have to our panelists is, how does your organization specifically assist with ETP benefits? And Mike, I'll let you start this one.
Sure. So I'm what is known as a ETP subcontractor. And what that means is the companies are the contractor with ETP. So the companies are actually applying to ETP for funding. And then I assist those companies on the application process. And then once we go through the application process, as Eddie was talking about, learning the particular information on each company, what their needs are, what their challenges are in terms of training needs, and also how many employees and how many will qualify. So we go through the application process on that to make sure that they're a good fit for ETP. And then once they're approved, then we do the administration, which is the qualifying the employees, going through the rosters, just making sure they're in compliance, uploading the information into the ETP database, providing status reports for companies so that they can know how well they're doing along a 21-month training over the 2-year contract. So in general, we kind of assist companies in the application and then the administration on their project.
Thank you. And William, if you could share with us how Cetta Sacramento Works assists companies with ETP benefits.
So we work in a similar manner as Mike. We actually have an ETP contract now, and Cetta has built our ETP services into our services that we provide to employers. So when we talk to employers about services, we talk about ETP as a service that we can help provide for them. We currently have a multiple employer contract, which is called a MIC. And we have three employers already associated with those contracts. One is Elica Health Services. The other is Vallara Corporation, formerly Butler, HVAC. And the third is Veterans Enhanced Technology Solutions. And we currently have about 655 employees associated with that ETP contract. And again, we do the same thing as Mike. We help them apply for the contract, and then we handle all the paperwork that's involved, the rosters, qualifying the employees, and maintaining the information in the database as relates to ETP.
Thank you, William. And Annie, can you provide from the community college side?
Yeah, you bet. So here's the good news. While ETP may seem in the forefront as a little complicated, the good news is you can hear from Mike and William, and you'll hear from myself, that the process is the same and it's consistent. And so there is an application process with a multiple employment contract holder like ourselves, and with William there with Cetta. We have an application process, and our application is about 1 or 2 pages that provide some basic information. So we collect that information from you. The first portion of the information is the name of your company, how many employees do you want to enroll in the program, how many employees do you have, and then we drill down on what is your interest and what are your real needs, and how can we help you both from access to the services, and then also being able to provide training and be a resource to you or your clients or those that you're serving, if you play a similar role in providing business services, that we then work with that employer to then determine what are the career upskilling and technical skills that you're looking to focus on. So it's always part of the application process. With the community colleges, we have a comprehensive training planning that we do with you, because our goal of working with you is to have a long relationship and where we're providing some career pathway for the worker and being able to advance in their position, earn a higher wage, and then reduce the turnover and improve your retention as a company. And so, some of the classes, like Michael outlined with business services, continuous improvement, whether it's a manufacturing and we're talking about technical skills or process improvement within the plant, or the most common is the supervisory development, that you have good employees that have been promoted within the company, and they need some help being able to supervise people because they were promoted because they showed up on time, they had good attendance, a great attitude, and they were an ideal employee. And you say, that's my supervisor. And sometimes in supervising others, and most often their colleagues that they worked side by side before, it's often hard to step into a supervisory role or a team lead role without some of those skills associated. And I know we've all had that experience of go follow that person. And that might have been your training initially when you started a position. So those are some of the programs that, and the benefits that we have in addition to accessing the services.
Thank you. So it sounds like to me that the community colleges can provide the training services in addition to working with the paperwork and application. And there are companies that may be doing their own training. And then in those cases, just needing assistance with the application and the paperwork side of it is something that Mike and William Walker are doing. So that sounds like there's a little, maybe a little bit of a difference there, in that the community colleges also provide the training, upskilling services that can be designed potentially for the employer to take advantage of these. If I got anything wrong there, let me know. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think just as a clarification and a question for Annie and William is, from my understanding with the multiple employer contract versus a single employer contract, just as a differentiation so people can understand, typically if an employer wants to apply for funding, they may need $80,000 or $100,000 or $200,000 for training reimbursement. And for an organization such as Annie's or Williams, and completely correct me, I'm just going to assume, but let's say they might have a $500,000 contract with ETP. And with a multiple employer contract, they can slice off bits and pieces of that for training for various companies. But if a company needs $200,000 and a community college or someone else has only $500,000 to work with, having 3 or 4 companies of that size may be too big, and they may want a single employer contract for their own. But I'd like for maybe Annie or William to kind of address that in terms of who would be good targets for a company wanting maybe a multiple employer contract to work with something like that, as opposed to getting their own single employer contract. You know, where's a good fit for getting their own single employer contract versus possibly working with a MEC? And you know, it's much easier working with a MEC for a single employer, just to, you know, as you said, 1 or 2 pages and you're done, yeah, as opposed to a 3 or 4 month application and, you know, a 30-page application for a single employer. So, but what are your thoughts, Annie or William, in terms of which avenue to proceed if you're a single employer?
Well, over the years, I've found that the larger the employer, I would advise them to do a single employer contract. I worked with Siemens for a long time, and they had their own ETP contract. And we were going to actually work with them to do an ETP contract, but we found that it didn't work very well because as a multiple employer, they just had an overwhelming number of people they need to train. And quite frankly, they didn't want us involved in the administrative part. So I would say any employer that has 500 or more employees probably would want to do a single employer contract. For us, our multiple employer contract includes smaller businesses. You know, Ellica's a smaller business, and I don't think they've ever done an ETP contract before. So I think that's why we actually approached them as an employer that we were providing other services to. So we said we would include them in a multiple employer contract. In the case of Alara, we worked with Alara at least 20 years now when they were Brutler, and they felt like they wanted to do a multiple employer contract because they had aspects that they didn't want to actually do an ETP contract for. And Veterans Enhanced Solutions, Technical Solutions, is an extremely new employer. They've only been around a year. So they're part of our multiple employer contract because I think that the actual ETP process may have been a little bit cumbersome for them to apply for it. So they felt like they wanted to do it with us first. And then we always encourage people, if you do it with us and you want to go out on your own and get your own ETP contract, you've already had the experience with us, so you know what you're in for. So that's how we do our multiple employer contract, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and similar for us, we service with we have a $1.5 million contract currently, and that's basically what we manage per year because it's a 2-year period, but an 18-month delivery period, right? So when we have, we average between 80 to 100 employers on our contracts at all times because in the rural regions of our area, we have a lot of small and mid-sized companies. And we've got a nice handful of large employers, and such as Enloe Medical, Enloe Medical Center, or Sierra Nevada Brewery, or some of the other large manufacturers. And so what we tend to do is we utilize that access to be able to provide those small to mid-sized companies access to the funding. And then if there is a company that has been with us for a while and they're ideal to have their own single employer contract, we use it as an onboarding process to help that employer understand how to run an ETP program, because the administration of it is it's not easy. And then they even own up to that. Like, okay, do you know what you're getting involved with? Because it's a step-by-step process. So we have the infrastructure, and we've been managing contracts since 2013, and the colleges have been managing it, since the late 80s. And so in the North State, though, for colleges, I would say we're very strong at this point. But we've been doing this since 2013. So we use it as an onboarding process and determine with that employer their readiness to go for their own ETP contract. A good example would be where we've had a couple of smaller companies locally here that really wanted their own contract. And it takes ETP the same amount of administration to run one single employer contract as it does a multiple employer contract. So we were trying to identify some of the smaller companies to help onboard them so that we can help them get access to those funds, whether it's training that they're delivering internally or they're receiving funds for training that they receive from us. So it's really about knowing the employer. And it's a great question, Mike, that a lot of people really try to go get their heads wrapped around of, okay, what's the approach I should take as an employer? And it really does depend on, let's say it's a new company startup. We did with CalPlant One as they were onboarding and getting started. They're a good example of they were under our multiple employer contract, and then they got their own contract, and now they have their own contract as they were building their company and building the infrastructure.
Thank you. And I do see there's a question in the chat. I'm going to try to get through 2 additional questions that we have for the panel, and then we'll go to the audience questions. So the next question that we have for the panel is, how does a business or organization get started, and what is the expected timeline? So Annie, I'll let you start this one.
Sure. So how does a business get started? So the first step is being able to contact one of your local resources. And so that would be, contacting Melissa Fish there at American River College. And the expected timeline is pretty quick on the application. And depending on the nature of the focus of the training, would then determine how we would get started on delivering training and getting you signed up for the funds. With any of the nonprofit and government in the alternative funds that we currently have, there is a pending process that ETP goes through and verifies your application. And we've found that to be a fairly quick turnaround. And when I say fairly quick, it's, a couple of weeks. And then from getting your training plan together and determining your plan is really going to be based off of, you can't pull everybody off of operations or out of their primary job to receive training. So we work with you to figure out the logistics and the planning of training on the right topics at the right time, according to the operational schedule, and also not doing training overload where it's this big training project and everybody feels overwhelmed. So we kind of have to strike a balance with that. So that expected timeline is according to the training needs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And William, same question to you. How does a business or organization get started with Cetta Sacramento Works assisting them, and what's the expected timeline?
Well, it really depends on whether that they want to contract directly with ETP or want to apply through a workforce board. And my understanding at some conversation I had, the normal turnaround time from being developed and going to the panel is about 3 to 4 months. And it depends. They can expedite those, like in the case of community colleges, based on the relationship that ETP has with that contractor. So it can be expedited, but again, the turnaround time will be 2 to 3 months. And I think the last contract that we're doing, it actually took about 2 to 3 months to get all the documentation together and get it into the ETP system.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
Mike, I'll give you the same question. What does it take to get started in the expected timeline?
Yeah. So usually when I start a new client, we'll set up an application intake meeting, and so that's about a 2-hour meeting, and I can get most of the information I need in about 2 hours with some follow-on emails in terms of needing some information about how many employees, how much did each employee make in terms of wages, benefits, things like that. Also, what topics they're going to be training on. So usually each industry tends to have different types of topics. What software programs is the company running? What commercial? Is there going to be on-the-job training? Is there going to be computer-based training? Is there going to be remote e-learning training? ETP typically does not want to reimburse a company's ongoing training because they understand that companies will be continuing to do that ongoing training. So what ETP wants to do is help support the strategic initiatives and the major goals of a company's training in terms of, basically if a company's here and they want to get to here in 2 years, what process does that look like, and how can ETP support that process? And so in the application, we talk about what are your current challenges, what are your current strategic goals for the company. Are you coming out with a new product? Are you coming out with a new market? Are you being challenged by new government regulations? Are you adding new equipment? Are you doing any process improvements? What is extraordinary over the next 2 years that we can highlight so that we can show ETP that there is some extraordinary needs for training above and beyond the ongoing training? And so it does take time to go through all that. And then once we do the application and we submit it, then it takes about 2 to 3 months for approval after that. So the overall time frame is usually about 3 to 4 months from beginning to end.
Wonderful, thank you. We have one more question to the panel, and then I do see the questions from Dr. Carol, I think Breiling, and then also another question that just came in. So our last question for the panel is, what challenges do businesses sometimes face when accessing ETP benefits? William, I'll ask you first.
So I want to go back to the last question and kind of share, Renee, as you know, we're a workforce board. So anytime we apply for funding as an organization, we have to have all that approved by our board. So that actually adds time onto an ETP contract as well. So as far as the challenges, I have some personal challenges. I have some organizational challenges with ETP. And I'll start with the first challenge. The first challenge that is always important is that the 90-day retention exists. So it's getting employers to understand that you must retain that employee for 90 days. The second challenge was paperwork, which was enormous. All of the reporting process that's built into ETP that sometimes actually is discouraging employers from ETP. And probably the biggest challenge that I face is the audit process. ETP does audit everything that you do, and sometimes they'll come in a year later and actually do an audit on your books. And at that point, they do have disallowed costs. So they can grab back any funding that they paid you under the ETP contract, particularly when it relates to retention. So I always try to get employees to understand that retention is key. and they don't take your word on retention. They actually have access to the base wage system. So they check EDD's system to make sure that person is still employed by that employer 90 days after the end of the training. So those were some of the challenges that we faced. And that is why we never claimed any of the ETP funding until after that 90-day retention. That was built into our model. We didn't claim any funding for benchmarks. We just waited 90 days after that person was retained by the employer, and then that's when we asked for the funding from ETP. So,
oh, thank you. Very interesting. Thanks so much. Mike, I'll ask you the same question. What are the challenges that businesses or organizations typically face?
Yeah, I think, so once a company is approved, then the challenge becomes, how do we implement it through our organization? Most companies in the Sacramento area tend to be the small to medium businesses, whereby they don't have a formal training department. So training tends to be decentralized among the various departments with managers, supervisors, foremen, especially if they're construction out in the field. And so getting the buy-in on foremen or supervisors, managers to make sure that they hand out the rosters each time that there's a training, make sure that people are signing the rosters and turning it in. It's the simple logistics of that, where we find if companies don't hit 100% of their goal, it's usually because it's not that they didn't do the training. They usually do the training that they thought they would. They just didn't capture the training on the rosters. And therefore, if you don't capture the training on the rosters with signatures from the employees, then we can't verify training occurred. So, you know, if you've got 7 managers, you know, 3 or 4 might be really good at turning in the rosters, but 2 or 3 aren't. And so is there going to be someone of stature and authority to kind of crack the whip to make sure that, no, we need everybody to turn in the rosters. We've committed to X number of hours of training, and we know that the company is doing the training. Therefore, we need each of the managers or trainers to actually document the training and turn that in. So I think it's just the logistics of that. If you use a consultant such as myself or another consultant we're talking about today, as Annie talked about, the database and entering the information, there's a lot of little rules and things like that. So having a consultant to help you navigate the rules, even on the rosters. It's a one-page roster, but in fact, tomorrow I've got a roster orientation type of meeting or just review. And it takes about an hour to kind of go through all the do's and don'ts and little rules of filling out the rosters properly. Simple things such as use a pen, not pencil, don't use whiteout. You know, if you make a mistake, just draw a line and initial, don't white out or use blackout. So it's just some things like that, or definitions on the roster. There's class lab, e-learning, productive lab. So understanding, you know, the difference between class lab versus productive lab. It's not complicated, but you do need to know what you're doing. So it takes about 2 to 3 months after approval for companies to get a flow whereby the managers are turning in the rosters. The ETP project manager for the company, whether that's a office manager, admin, whoever the case may be, that they can review the rosters, make sure that they are complete, that they're in compliance, and then in our case, then they would forward the rosters to us. We review them again for compliance, and then we take that information and upload into the ETP system. You know, and interesting, to William's point, in terms of there is a 90-day retention period, which means that after training is finished, then ETP wants to verify, did the employees that you have hours for, did they remain with the company for at least 90 days after training? And if people leave before that, then it's a 2-year contract, but if someone leaves after 9 months, what do you do? Well, in that case, we have to artificially create a 90-day retention period where we have to delete training hours for the previous 3 months before the person left. So out of 9 months of training, they would get 6 months of training credit, and the last 3 months would not. So there are these kind of rules that you need to know. it does help to have a consultant or such as Annie, William, myself, and other consultants to help navigate that. I will say though, ETP does offer, to their credit, they offer an ETP analyst that will walk you through the application process, and they offer ETP monitor once you're approved to walk you through all the ins and outs of the administration. So it is possible, and there are companies doing it on their own without any help at all and using ETP personnel. I believe the percentage is about 30% of the companies do it on their own, and 70% use some kind of assistance with a consultant or things like that, because there are lots of rules, but it can be done without outside help.
Thank you. Very thorough answer. Annie, what are the typical pitfalls that you see for businesses or organizations that engage with the community colleges on ETP benefits?
I think from our experience with employers is being able to understand how to allocate time for training. And that is being able to balance the schedule of someone's primary responsibilities and determine what groups of folks can receive common training within the company. And then how can we determine on scheduling what employees can access that same training by coming to the college to attend with other employers we call them, public sessions or multiple employer sessions, where there's one or two people that they can release from the office and have a backup cover for that individual for that, task that they're performing, to release them for training. And most often, that's for like a half a day to balance the schedule for the employee so the employee can go back to the location. But then there's also the benefit that we've learned through this pandemic is being able to experience learning in a virtual capacity, that we were already delivering virtual sessions prior to the pandemic because we have employers with people in multiple locations. So if you're focusing on a team building exercise and you've got some of the teams that are in different locations, we were already using this platform to be able to facilitate a learning experience that engages learners. And so with that, you're doing breakout sessions just like you would in a room, like we've all experienced through Zoom when you attend a breakout session to improve the experience. And so the first thing is figuring out, the operational schedule of when to provide training. The second is, if you are going to do virtual, we need to ensure that they're all not sitting in a conference room just looking at the screen, because then the interaction then tends to reduce the learning for the individuals too. So even with that, we're working with the employer to set up the best learning experience, because if they're going to be paying the employee while they're in training, because that's a requirement of ETP, they have to be paid a wage during training, which is the investment that employer is making. We want to ensure that investment is going to be the greatest experience, that someone can apply what they've learned and bring that back to the office. And the employer then can see some level of a behavioral change, or the employee is actually acknowledging how they're able to more easily perform their job and reduce their stress around their job because they're more empowered and knowledgeable about their position. So I would say it's the logistics and working with the employer, because the highlights that Mike and William shared of being challenges are real challenges. So that's a challenge we work with the employers. And so I'd say with the colleges, we also find that the logistics is what we're focusing on, so that the employer has less thinking to do, and we're helping them with the how to make it happen so that they can meet their objectives of whatever training that they need to make, which is what we call performance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Dr. Carol, is it Breiling? You have been so patient. Am I saying that right at all? Okay, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question to the panel, that would be great.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm not sure how I fit into this, but my school, Center for Higher Purpose, is a nonprofit. I train people, the average citizen or returning citizen, how to become a substance use counselor, where they can go forward and lead groups and work for agencies. I understand in the construction fields that there's a lot of people that call out sick time due to being hungover. A lot of addiction is a reality of many of the employers out there. So I was just wondering, is there a way that I could train one of their employees to become an addiction counselor for their own the employer? I don't have to be the one doing it. My training can be finished and they can get certified close to 6 months' time. How do I integrate what I do to bring substance use treatment into the employer's realm? I think it's a worthy thought. I mean, you see a bunch of mental health coming into the employment arena, but what about substance use and addiction, which causes a lot of havoc for employers and their employees? That's my question. I just want to know how to integrate it.
Yeah, Annie, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, so health and wellness is real. You know, the pandemic, we've had a significant amount of fires that have impacted our region. And after the Camp Fire up here within Butte County, we leaned into a resiliency skills training for our employers, because incidents and accidents were increasing at the workplace because everybody was, you know, had stress that they were dealing with. And it was hard to just leave your, you know, personal problems at home when the impacts are traumatic. And so, so here in the North, we have a Butte Thrives organization, and we went and earned a certification for a community resiliency model, which ties into your work. And so where I think that working with Valley Vision and many of the organizations that serve multiple employers, I think those employers who have access to funds, that they can include it. So, you know, like Michael's serving a single employer. So a single employer can choose wherever they get their training services, right? And so I think if you were able, I guess my recommendation would be that if you identified, and usually take like a pilot or a couple of companies first, you know, your trusted 3 or 4, not a lot of them, and get a good case study where you're training internal folks to have that skill set. They would just need to write it into their contract that they were providing you know, a certification or a training for the employees, and that would fall under, you know, underneath some of the, you know, the behavioral coaching, some of the human resources types of training. So the employer would have to get the topic approved by ETP. So in relation to this call, the employer would have to get the topic approved. And quite frankly, I find that the employers that we're working with, if it's not approved by ETP and it's important enough that it's a real issue for them, they're willing to pay for the service. So, so we don't always go in with ETP can serve everything for all people. We kind of go in to identify what are the problems that employer is experiencing, and how can this type of intervention, both the training and the cost of training, because, you know, margins are tight and the cost of training is tight. So I think my recommendation would be is to identify some companies that you can provide that service to, and if they're with ETP, they can get the approved, you know, training for it. And then that employer, whoever's doing training internally, let's say you're doing it for a group of supervisors to, you know, have these coaching skills to support employees to make some behavioral changes inside the workplace. I think that would have a value for an employer, and, you know, is a much needed effort for, you know, healthy working community members and helping people advance in their jobs.
Thank you. Did Mike or William have anything additional you want to add? Okay.
I think the answer was good. I'll defer to Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, my only comment would be, I thought Annie did a really thorough job. From a single employer perspective, how they would handle that is that ETP will, in terms of trainers, the trainers can be internal staff or they can be external, what we would call vendors, training vendors. And therefore, if a company hired you to train a staff member or several staff members, then they could. The reimbursement for that, the key on this would not necessarily be your actual fee. It would be the time spent being trained. So as an example, let's say if you offer a half-day course, that's 4 hours. At $23 an hour reimbursement, that'd be 23 times 4, just shy of 90 or around $90. So the reimbursement to ETP would be around $90 for a half-day reimbursement per person. So if there's 3 people, that'd be 3 times 90 or 270. So the reimbursement mechanism is based on time and people, not so much your fee. So it may offset part of your fee, or it may offset all of your fee, depending upon how many people were there and how many hours are spent. But it's based on time, not so much on fee in terms of the company would be reimbursed for your services.
Yeah, the way it works with Center for Higher Purpose, I move them through the modules. They can do that at 4 in the morning if they want. Everything is done online and they do it. I send them the assignments. They complete it, send it back to me. I review, I grade and pass, and then I certify. It's really easy. I tell you what, the DOR uses me all the time. They're constantly referring me to students. My whole entire rate is $5,000 per student. It's $4,500 plus a lot of fees that Cadet charges me to oversee and certify the people that come up through my organization. It's very easy to complete that the employee can do on their own time and do it very expeditiously.
Thank you for the question, and I'll just encourage you to connect maybe in the chat. I want to make sure that we're honoring time. We do have an employer that has joined us, and we wanted to hear directly from an employer who's used ETP benefits. I think, Mike, I'll allow you to introduce if that's okay, Angela, if you don't mind.
Sure. So yeah, I'm really happy that Angela from School of Innovations and Achievement has been able to join us today. Angela has been working with their single employer contract, and I believe is on, I think it's their 4th ETP contract.
Yeah.
And so just a quick highlight, and then I'll turn it over to Angela, but School of Innovations is a school software developing program or a company. And what I love about them is that their goal, they have found that school attendance is the #1 indicator for school success for students. So a lot of their software program is built around tracking attendance for school districts. And what's very interesting is that when you apply for multiple ETP contracts through the years, it cannot be a copy paste for each contract. Each contract must be something new, must be something different than the previous contract. And with the current or the previous COVID lockdowns, it has really impacted, as most of us know, school attendance, and where students have fallen through the cracks, have not come back to school, things like that. For a company like School Innovations and Achievement, that has presented some challenges in terms of helping these school districts with this, hybrid classes, with helping them try to find students in terms of attendance. So I'll let Angela speak to that, but I share that because the latest ETP contract that the company has, the skill sets that they needed and the new products that they had to come out with and the enhancements that they had to come out with in helping school districts cope with COVID and lockdowns and then coming back to school really provided tremendous challenges that the company needed to meet, and that they partnered with ETP to help train for the skills that was going to be needed for those new enhancements and products. So with that, Angela, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks for having me. Yeah, as Mike said, the pandemic definitely has, made us have, pivot in different directions just to help out the schools, attendance being our main focus, and with truancy and resources that the schools don't have. So we're a software development company, software and service. And so our software, we've had to, make a lot of changes to our software and enhancements to accommodate the schools. And this is with relation to tracking their attendance. We collect data from the schools and help them produce like truancy letters and reach out to the families to give them the status of their students. So again, we've had a lot of product enhancements, and along with that has come definitely the training, because once we roll those out, internally we're doing training as well as training schools on our software. That portion, of course, is not counting towards ETP funds, but internally we have to do a lot of training with the enhancements and with the processes. Our company is still all operating from home, so we've transitioned out of the office. So, add in that factor, and trying to collect rosters. I have a lot to say, so you'll have to stop me if I'm going in another direction. But yeah, so having this program in place, this is our fourth time around. This has been the most challenging period. The application process was a lot easier this time around, just because you kind of already know, and with Mike's help, because we use Mike, we already know what to expect that the application is going to require, the content. But what we have to provide is, what is our focus this year? Like, why do we need these training funds? What is it? We can't copy what we were doing last year or the prior years. So what is our new focus? For us, that's not a problem, just because we always have new products coming out. So the training is definitely going to be there. As far as the process with the rosters, that all the rosters would normally come directly to me. So when we were in the office, much easier process, because we did have our managers trained. You do have to follow up, because, it's management. So they're not always going to stay on top of, collecting those. So you do have to, reach out to them and make sure you're getting them, turned in, things like that. And we'd have a periodic, training every few months, just as a refresher, because that's not the first thing on their mind. But the important thing is collecting the roster. Now that we're at home, we do that electronically. So some of the trainings, they're not so much of a challenge with the trainings. We do a lot of like one-on-ones and then smaller group trainings. So the focus isn't, too difficult. Collecting the rosters, those all get generated through me. So we rely heavily on Zoom, and that is acceptable through ETP. So we don't have wet signatures. We actually use the Zoom participant reports to show, because that's got your start and stop time. So that has made it, much easier. So I prepare the rosters. I just stay on top of it. It's not a full-time thing once you have a, routine down, and those get turned in electronically to ETP. I'm not sure how other companies that are stay-at-home are doing it, but I've worked out my kinks in the whole process, and that seems to be working out well. And again, staying in contact with our employees and our managers mainly as to those trainings. The key thing for the electronic version is, since we're using Zoom, is training the employees to identify their training topic, to make sure it says training. That way, for me, who I'm retrieving that information for a roster, I can easily identify it. So, and then I do follow up with them afterwards to make sure that, just to confirm this was a training, what it was covering. Because once your contract is done, if, ETP will usually come back and do a short audit. And I don't know if that's the right term, Mike, but they'll come back and just pick out a few random rosters and ask questions. So you want to make sure that those were definitely related to training. I don't know if there's anything else you want me to add, Mike.
And one question I would have for you, Angela, is if any business or organization is on the fence about using ETP benefits, what advice would you give them?
I would definitely move forward with it. You know, if you're preparing everything on your own, it might be a little challenging. I mean, I think it's great to have, you know, Sierra Consulting, you know, helping us out. It's a great, you know, go-between. And any questions I have, I can run it by Mike, because I've definitely had questions as to whether something qualified or under what curriculum it may fall under. But you know, having our experience is having Mike, you know, as the go-between. So in that respect, I found it quite, you know, seamless. But I would move forward. I mean, it's great to have those funds to put back into the company for training. And it also gives us a better visual as to the areas that we're training in. So it kind of opens up your eyes as to what's needed and, you know, cross-training. I mean, we've done cross-training, you know, prior to being on these contracts, but this gives us a little more insight as to maybe areas that we need to focus on for cross-training.
Thank you. Mike, did you have anything additional? Otherwise, I know we have a question in the chat from Jeanette. All right, Jeanette, we'll have you ask your question. And I don't know if the English language learner question was also yours. Are you able to unmute, Jeanette, or would you like me to just ask for you?
Honestly, I've been sitting back here taking notes and I've forgotten what my question was. And I think it got answered, to be perfectly honest.
Oh, okay, it did. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. I guess I should. Hey, I didn't want to get the camera because I didn't get dressed, but hey, here I am.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to call you out. So somebody had sent me, is there an initiative for employers who retain their employees over 90 days?
I just wondered, as a part of this initiative, a part of the funding, what happened was I was thinking that the employees, if they kept them for 90 days, then they wouldn't, when they got audited, they'd be okay. And then, but then I think Mike, addressed it by saying that it actually, in fact, required that they stay there for 2 years. Otherwise, they had to repay the funding for the 90 days at a half-a-day rate or something. So that got, so I guess my question was for a company was, do they get some sort of initiative for their employee retention? Because right now that there is a major issue. And I think also the Centre for Higher Purposes kind of spoke into that a little bit because of the importance with the mental health issues that are happening in the background and asking about the funding and how that, because that's a massive problem out there. And if you want to keep someone for 2 years, you better be like speaking to someone like the Centre for a Higher Purpose or one of those other wellness companies. And by the way, I'm that too. That's my company. I didn't put it on there, but I'm not ready to come out yet. But anyway, so there's my questions, and thanks for opening up the floor to me. Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just say real quick on that. Again, an employee does not have to, the contract is 2 years long, but an employee does not have to be there for all 2 years. The retention period is part of the ETP contract. We build in a 90-day retention period at the end of the contract, but if an employee does leave early, then we can artificially create that 90-day retention period by deleting the last 90 days of training that the employee did before they left. So they can, the tenure can be less than 2 years. There's no penalty there other than we just need to delete the last 90 days of training to create a retention period.
Annie, did you have more?
Yeah, just to support Mike's comment, there is that our tracking systems are built. We don't wait till the end of the contract to do a final bill for companies. So let's say, XYZ company has, 20 employees that they want to focus training on. That XYZ company doesn't have to wait for all of our 80 employers to close out their projects first to close out their own. So what that means is if there is somebody who terms, we track back to the last day of training that they had with us, because we can have some short-term projects like the XYZ company that I'm giving to you as an example, and we'll use that tracking system to back into that last day of training. Or we can carry companies all the way through our contract, and let's say they get, it's 18 months of delivery. So let's go big. So let's say they had, 15 months of delivery and received, that company really made a big investment in that employee. And sometimes what happens is they get promoted and then they advance and then they go get another job. That happens. So we have the ability of working with our local employers of finding out where that employee went, and we do some incidental placement. And so we find out where they're at. And sometimes if they went to another employer and they're working with us, we can re-enroll them. But for the most part, if you use an 80-20 rule, 80% of the folks, if they term, we just back into the last day of training and capture as many as the hours as possible to submit, so that the employer doesn't have like a double pain there. Like I lost the employee and the investment that I made. So we try to, like Mike said, we back into those 90 days and we try to capture as much training as possible for those individual employees.
Thank you. Earlier somebody had asked about, is English language learner training allowed? And I know, Annie, you answered in the chat that ESL is allowed. Does that person have any additional questions related to that? If you do, you can unmute at this time. Okay, that might have answered it then. So English language training is allowed. Are there any other questions from the audience? We just want to give you another opportunity here if anyone has any burning or unanswered questions for any of our panelists.
Yeah, I did want to get some clarification on the 90-day retention. Is the 90-day retention based at the end of the contract, or is it based at the end of the training?
So there's two parts to that question. Since training is tracked on an individual, a per person, it's not based off of the whole company. It's a per person. So the first thing is that it's a per person. The secondary thing is the company or a multiple employer contract holder, they buffer in and they put a 90-day in, because the last day of your delivery has to be 3 months before the end of your contract to account for the 90 days. So your last group of people that you're going to bill, they need to have within the term of the contract a 90-day period to demonstrate that they've achieved the 90-day retention. So you can handle individuals on an individual basis throughout the contract, but when it comes to the end of the contract, you need to give yourself 90 days retention period. So you back into the end of the contract. So like for us, our contract ends December 20th, 2023. So I tell all of our employers our last day of delivery is September 19th, 2023.
So the 90-day retention really becomes complicated more at the end of the contract than at the beginning of the contract.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Okay. It's pretty straight. It's actually probably more straightforward at the end of the contract because it's a clean 90 days. But when you're tracking individuals and you've got 600 of them, I think you said in your contract, you've got 600 people.
Right.
If there's like 10 of them, you just have to track those people and figure out what their last day of training was, because it's 90 days from that person's last day of training.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you bet.
And Chris, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead and unmute.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I had a question for William over at Cetta and kind of anybody else who's managing or working with a one-stop shop. This is kind of a general ETP question. I'm just curious, I'm relatively new to my role and to learning about ETP. So I'm just curious how you pitch this program to businesses, small and large? And if it's something that businesses in Sacramento County or Butte County or anywhere in the state, are they familiar with this, or is this part of your kind of business services approach, or how you're are you selling this to businesses, or most time businesses coming to you saying, hey, we really need help with training, and then you say, oh, perfect, we have this great program that you might be eligible for? I'm just kind of curious in a general sense how you get the word out there about this this kind of awesome opportunity.
Well, our original contract, the actual business pitched it to us. They looked at us and they said, you know, we want to apply for ETP funds, but we find that it would be a lot easier to go with a workforce development board. That's what we were at that time. And we actually sat down and wrote the contract with that particular entity. Now, our original contract could have been considered a multiple employer contract, but it really was more of a training provider providing training to different employers. So what got complicated with that contract is we had one entity providing training, which was under a tech force grant, which was for computerization and automation of the workforce. But we had at that point, at least 50 to 60 businesses using this contract. So we had anywhere from Rayleigh's to Schools Federal Credit Union to to Raging Wire. So all these businesses were using the training model by this school, and they were training their employees. And then we actually uploaded the rosters of the employees being trained by that particular school for the school to get the reimbursement, not necessarily the employer. The actual school pitched it as a training service that they provided, and the employer used their training services to train their employees, and we pitched it to the school as something we could help them do. So in answer to your first question, the school actually pitched it to us. Recently, our contracts with employers, and Valara being a good example, is that our board member actually is the president of Valara. So he understood about ETP and the benefits of ETP. So he pitched it to us and said, can you work with us and do this employer contract? And so we talked to Elica and we talked to the Veterans Program, and they decided to go along with it. So we do pitch it to employers, and not everybody bites. Again, larger employers, like I ran across PG&E and Siemens, who I worked with religiously over the years, and both already had ETP contracts. So they weren't necessarily interested in going to a contract with us. But the smaller employers who are not familiar with ETP will try us out in the beginning. And then we encourage them, if they want to do their own contract, we will work them through that process as well, if that makes sense.
Okay. And just to add on to William's comment there, Chris, we work locally here with the Alliance for Workforce Development, which is the organization that's hired by Nortech. And so the business services, we have a regular communication with all the business services reps, and want to show up to that employer together, where we're providing the one-stop services. So I think there's somebody else, there are a couple of other folks that provide one-stop services. So the conversation sounds like this: the recruitment, the providing access to workers, and all of those, different wraparound services that you help individuals be successful on the job. And if you have OJT funds that you can help with that individual, whether they're 30, 60, or 90-day funds that you can help that employer, that's one piece of the equation. Where the community college and the ETP funds come into play is if that individual's being onboarded, and in general, that employer may have, sometimes we're hidden behind door number 2. They go, oh, we didn't know the colleges did that. Oh, we didn't know about those funds. And so then building a relationship is having that, one stop to the employer of a central communication that says, okay, well, here are some services that are available as partners together to serve that employer. And then the employer can have access to the funds, through a multiple employer contract holder or a single employer contract. If you walk into in Sonoma County, there's, pretty large organizations there. So there are many candidates that, would be, able to apply for the funds even as a single employer contractor. But again, we have experience of working with our local partner. We try to show up like a we for the employer and be able to share what services that we have together that can serve that employer. And then we just keep that open network and communication going.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to put their contact information in the chat. I do want to reserve a last couple of minutes here for the Metro Business Center to share about the services they offer to support businesses. That this webinar has been offered in conjunction with the Metro Business Center. We've done this in the past. So if you are a Sacramento-based business particularly, and you have some questions about the information that you received on this webinar or about other business support services, they're here to help you. So I'm going to hand it over to Maddie.
Thank you so much, Renee. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. In our last couple of minutes here, I will just go ahead and provide a quick overview of the services that we provide as the Metro Business Center. So as I did mention at the beginning, we do provide that technical assistance primarily to small and mid-sized business owners within the region. We can go ahead. Yep, perfect. But we are a department of the Sacramento Metro Chamber of Commerce. So we do serve a 6-county region. That's Yuba, Sacramento, El Dorado, Placer, Sutter, and Yolo counties. And as part of that 4-point business promise, which you can see on the screen, we really focus on that strong business and ready workforce points of that 4-point business promise. So really, again, we offer guidance, direction, and resources to small and mid-sized businesses throughout our region. And also in alignment with the region's economic recovery and growth strategies, we deliver a suite of services, which does include some one-on-one business consulting to our small business and mid-sized business owners, as well as specialized business education. So this is an example of one of the business education resources that we offer with our partners with Valley Vision to the community. Really, we want to focus on being a connector and a resource partner to those small and mid-sized business owners. So we always say if it's a service that we don't offer directly as the Metro Business Center, that's why we place so much value in holding these business educational resources for the community, is to be able to connect our business owners and our businesses to the resources that are available to them, and really bringing awareness to that. So we can go ahead and progress to the next slide. This just highlights some of the areas that our Metro Business Center consultant team does specialize in, working with our small and mid-sized business owners. And then on the next slide here, we just have our contact information. So like I said, if you have any questions about the information that you received today, or if you're looking for some of that technical assistance for your small or mid-sized business, or if you have small and mid-sized business owners in your personal and professional communities and they're looking for resources, please always feel free to reach out. Again, we're happy to connect anybody with the resources that we're aware of. And just want to say again, thank you so much to our panelists today and to the Valley Vision team, and for you all for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Maddie. And just a reminder to all, we will be sending out a post-event survey. It really helps us if you can fill that out so that we know what we're doing well and what might need to improve, and also to receive information about additional topics that might be of interest to the business community. Oh, and it looks like Danielle has also linked that in the chat. So if you can grab it really quickly and fill it out, it's a few short questions. That would help us do our best job possible. I want to thank the panel for committing their time to this, and the planning team for this. I do want to say Danielle Sousa is the mastermind behind the webinar and is generally very quiet, but I want to just champion all her efforts in bringing this webinar to fruition, along with Isabel de la Cruz. And again, thank you everyone for spending your afternoon with us. We hope that some of the mystique around ETP was taken away for you. And if not, you've made some contacts to get more information. Have a great afternoon, everyone.